My name is Joviana Meza.
And my name is Yaniris Chacon. We are both women, and here we will analyze and propose a thesis on the women's suffrage movement and its impact or significance for today.
In the women's suffrage movement, they faced many struggles to gain their unalienable rights.
The women's suffrage movement started when women who believed in equality met up on July 19, 1848, in Seneca Falls, New York. They campaigned to abolish slavery at the time, and when it finally happened, they shifted their efforts to focus on their own rights. The suffragettes were trying to demand the vote for women.
Before the 1920s, women were not allowed to vote. People thought that they were not intelligent enough to. These people thought women were inferior to men. Women were told to be submissive wives and mothers that had to only be concerned with home and family.
Women wanted equal pay and equal rights as men.
The top leaders in the movement were Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Alice Paul, and Ida B. Wells. They all wanted equality and to be treated the same as men.
The women's suffrage movement was a movement for women for the right to vote that led to the 19th Amendment to pass on June 4, 1919, and was ratified to the U.S. Constitution in August 1920. Few people know that the movement was put on hold because of the Civil War and actually begun in the 1840s with the Seneca Falls Convention.
Women had to abruptly stop the women's suffrage movement due to the war efforts and move towards the abolishment of slavery, though they still met occasionally to discuss their own freedoms. The early pioneers of the movement, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Frances Willard, fought for equality to fight the sexism surrounding women at the time. They granted women a free platform to be represented with their own rights.
Boys think they can play sports better than girls, but I don't think that's true. And like in the old days, the men would go out and get the jobs, and the women would have to stay home and do all the housework and stuff. And I don't think that was fair either. That's the way it was. I couldn't help it.
The status quo of a woman's norms were challenged through this movement, gaining so much momentum in society because of its radical ideas. It became a real challenge to be taken seriously by the court, where at the time was composed of all white males.
As women protested on the streets to gain awareness for their fight, they would have food and objects thrown at them, symbolizing their inferiority in society in the eyes of many. They had gained popularity later, though, through the power of media and newspapers.
Suffragists had also created their very own rendition of a feminist newspaper to boost their presence in society. This, of course, gave them opportunities to speak about their inequalities to the masses, informing more women to speak up about their own experiences facing this inequality.
The main fighter for suffrages was the media spreading their fight to the masses. To be more precise, newspapers were powerful in spreading support for the women's suffrage and bringing government attention to the suffragettes' doorsteps. Newspapers amplified their efforts of being heard. The Revolution was the first newspaper made by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton to be a suffragist newspaper. Later on, the Women's Journal was created and covered suffrage news, child labor, and unfair marriage laws.
As women were using media as their main power source, they brought public's attention to their stories of injustice. They would recount their experiences of rape and abuse and inequality. This would ultimately receive sympathy from the public and change the public's view on their effort. As this political event got larger, the government was able to be persuaded.
This was worrying to many women, and they felt they had enough equality in their households as it is.
By your letter. What did you mean by women's rights? I have just returned from a church meeting where we were given more accounts about the terrible conditions of the slaves. They have no freedom or rights. Don't women already have rights? Men must work very hard to provide their wives with a home and security and to support their children. What more could women desire?
Many also thought that being given the right to vote would take away characteristics of their femininity. Giving women political independence would even change male-female roles in the family structure, severely damaging it. Suffragists believed that it was time to change the idea of women's passive nature and be seen as stronger than they look. The women in the movement wanted to change the status quo of women being property, belonging to a man, or not being included in their own thoughts about politics. They had nothing and still found power in protesting for their rights. They revolutionized the way women can express themselves, and in the bigger picture found a way to protest their opinions on an unconstitutional topic peacefully, to gain their own rights.
Through the courageous power and determination of the leaders of the movement, today women get to vote in the United States without being discriminated against for their vote. Women are able to say who they want in their political office and are able to participate in voting just like the rest of the country is able to do, and can find representation in politics. Without personal domestic threat to the nation, women won the right that men have launched wars, conflicts, and rebellions to achieve. Though it was non-violent, it was still a battle and a struggle to get rid of this inequality.
The women in this movement changed society to how we know it to be today, and changed it positively without any death or violence inflicted. The women's movement has a lot of importance because of the great impact it had on the rest of the world, including today. Movement's purpose was the right for women to vote and to become political leaders. Back then, people did not see or accept women as their leaders.
Now, in the present, men and women think that having women in politics is very important. Women having the right to vote and protesting for their rights was a large step towards women's equality. The movement showed that women really cared about themselves and about their place in society.
The struggle for equality for women continues today. From equal pay to sexual harassment, many women still suffer inequalities in society all over the world. In a way, the women's suffrage movement still continues today.
Technically, though suffrage has been met since 1920, women are still opposing sexism, underrepresentation, and bias. Times are changing but are not totally in favor for the ladies. Women are still fighting other battles now but are still fighting for women as a whole.
In recent years, there has been a lot of other factors women are facing, but there are still representation for women in offices, and we can finally express our ideas, and so in society understands there are all types of women in the country, and there should not be discrimination for our gender.
This all started with Abigail Adams writing a letter that says to remember the ladies in the making of the Constitution.
That was only included that all men are created equal. Going through the 1820s through the 1880s, there was a stereotype for women to live their lives in domesticity. Some women loved this and were okay with being mothers, and in other cases teach children republicanism. Women later worked in textile mills and found permanent working in these mills, though they were paid very low wages. This gave society a larger picture of women because work was seen as a respectable thing to do in society. In 1848, the first convention for women's rights was organized, and where Elizabeth Cady Stanton and other women activists wrote the Declaration of Sentiments for the Supreme Court to consider giving women more equality and to let them organize their own opinion for the vote. The American Civil War disrupts suffrage activity as women, North and South, diverts their energies to war work.
The war itself, however, serves as a training ground as women gain important organizational and occupational skills they will later use in post-bellum organizational activity. It gives women even more respect through the years. The status quo of a woman's norms were challenged through this movement, gaining so much momentum in society.